Good evening. So, it's good to see everyone. How's everyone doing? Good. Thank you for coming tonight. They're telling me that there's a lot of traffic out there. So we may have people coming in a little bit straggling in as I'm going on. So it's hard for me to concentrate when that happens, but we'll do our best. I'm going to, I didn't know how the room was going to look, but this is if you want to pick up the source sheets, can you see this? So if you want to pull up the source sheets on your phone, or your device, or your electronics, which everybody should have. Just kidding, okay. I don't have to. I'm saving trees. I think I am anyway. If I had some tape, I would tape it in front of the lectern, but I don't, so I won't. I could maybe put it up here. Can you see it here? Oh, look at that. Okay. Nobody move. Okay. Can you see it over there? It matters. No, you can't see it. Of course not. Huh? Can they see? I don't know. I'll read it out. You want me to read it out once? https:// what would a shiur be without me reading out the URL? www.sefaria.org/sheets SHEETS/78777. Okay. Alrighty. So, tonight, I would like to share with you some ideas about Rosh Hashana, mainly spilling over into Yom Kippur, for a bit of perspective in terms of what it is that we're heading into. We've got a bit of a diverse audience, so meaning, what I mean by that is in terms of who's been to my Rosh Hashanah shiurim previously. So some of you have been to all of them, some of you have been to none of them, some of you have heard them. So what I'm going to do, just to be safe, is I'm going to give a brief introduction on the basic ideas of Rosh Hashanah that I always build on. Because to me, Rosh Hashanah is not a multicolored thing that changes every single year. It's the same thing, same prayer, same everything. And so it's based on the same foundations. The question is where do we go from those foundations? And what elements can we develop and understand in terms of incorporating them into our lives as far as those basic elements are concerned? So, I will begin with the basic elements, as I always do, and from there we will build. The first thing that it's important for us to remember about Rosh Hashanah is how is it that the Torah presents it to us. The Torah really doesn't say very much about Rosh Hashanah, besides it tells us that we have to bring sacrifices, offerings, as we do in the old days in the Bet Midrash with every one of the Hagim. But in terms of the nature of the day, it says very little. What it tells us about Rosh Hashanah is that it is a Yom Teruah. Yom Teruah literally means it's a day of sounding a blast or an alarm. So in one place it says that it's a Yom Teruah, in another place it says that it is Zichron Teruah, and here it introduces the word Zikaron, which essentially means memory, and that the blast is to be for the sake of memory. And this, really, the issue of memory and the sound, what we would now recognize as the shofar, are the oldest elements of Rosh Hashanah. Which means that if we had to strip down Rosh Hashanah, rather than build it up, which we will tonight, we're going to build up Rosh Hashanah to be able to see how it manifests, but if we had to strip down Rosh Hashanah to its most basic concepts, which we always want to do on a certain level, to be able to know what things are made of. So I have a distinct memory, I've mentioned this before, but I have a distinct memory of my first Yom Kippur here, the Spanish and Portuguese Jews congregation. And for me, it was a jarring experience. And the reason why it was a jarring experience, because everything that I knew about Yom Kippur, that I had grown up with on Yom Kippur, was not here. Except for the liturgy, meaning the language, the wording. But all of the tunes and the procedure was for all intents and purposes missing for me. I grew up in a Syrian community. I was used to hearing the Syrian prayers and tunes and so on for all of my life. I could recite them all for you practically by heart from beginning to end. There's not a service I can't take and lead on Yom Kippur and Rosh Hashana. But things were different. There were slight things that I was able to remember and connect to, or sounded somewhat like what it was that we would sing. And so that forced me to do something. It forced me first of all, not to lean on my stimuli for the day. What do I mean by that? We all have stimuli. In other words, for most of us who are used to being in a particular environment or setting for any particular experience, there are externals, there are stimuli around that trigger my feeling of the day. And so if you've been praying here, keeping your Rosh Hashana Yom Kippur here for many, many years, there are different tunes that bring you into the day. That's all. It's Yom Kippur starting. Not for me. Now it is. But it wasn't. Right? For me it was la 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 la. That was how we started. L'chayeli. So that's our l'chayeli. If I go to another synagogue, they may be saying l'chayeli, but in a totally different tune, which is sometimes worse. Right? You're taking my words and putting different music to it. But what do? So those are there in order to be able to trigger a response to the day that we inherently, innately know. But what happens when you don't have those things? Do you lose the day? And the answer should be, well, hopefully not. But the only way not to lose the day, when you do not have those external stimuli that you are used to hearing that bring you into it, is to identify the core of the day. So if we were theoretically to go back in time to the earlier Rosh Hashana, before even the liturgy was composed, what would we find that was familiar to us? Practically nothing. There would only be one thing that we would find familiar to us. And what would that be? The shofar. So that runs through. So that sound, yes, is primal. That sound reaches deep to the depths of our souls. It goes way back. And that is all the Torah presents, essentially. Right? So it's not the apple and honey that is at the crux of this day. That is as new as you get. You don't get much newer than apple and honey. I mean, we didn't even use honey in halab. There was no honey. Right? What did we use? You want sugar. Right? We use apple and sugar. Right? But that's very, very, very new. The liturgy, kind of midway. But if you open a Sephardi versus an Ashkenazi machzor, you'll find certain things that are quite old that are consistent. Other things completely local. Composed by the local scholars, rabbis, poets, and so on. Here, every Spanish poet that ever lived got his stuff printed in our liturgy. We go further back, and all we have is the shofar. And so, what the Torah says about the shofar is that it is zikaron. It is meant to awaken my memory. And it is from this that the Hachamim build everything that they have. Anything that's been discussed throughout all of history is not only received from generations past, but built on that concept. So this is a concept which is important for us to remember, that our people have been speaking about for 3,000 years. What does memory mean? Understand that. Yeah? Nobody was speaking about this 3,000 years ago. Except us. And so there were certain things that we began to understand and discover about memory. One major thing that we began to understand about memory is that identity is seated in memory. Who I am, what I know myself to be, the person that I identify with, exists only because of my memory. Consider if, God forbid, we didn't have our memory, and we were not able to string together the experiences of our lives, the people that we knew, the moments that we lived, where would we be? What would we be? Would we still be the same person that we tend to know now? So identity lives in memory. It is couched, it's seated in our memory. And if that is the case, if identity is seated in memory, then essentially the nature of my memory, the capacity that I have to remember things, which is the opposite of dismembering things, to connect the elements of my life, is the nature, or to the degree that I will have a robust, whole identity. And that's our challenge, isn't it? I mean, ultimately, it's what we struggle with. And so I want tonight, in our time that we share together, to look into that a bit. So there was one level that I've always looked at it. And I've done this in previous years, and I'm going to present it tonight, but we're going to move beyond it tonight. And we're going to expand it a bit tonight. The way that I've looked at it in previous years is to question myself, right? What are the components of self? What do I know in my conscious mind? Forget about the unconscious mind, because if we're dealing with the unconscious mind, there's a whole treasury in there, that we're not aware of, obviously, because it's unconscious, that comprises very much of what I am. And it's dormant. It's quiet. It whispers. We don't understand it. We're very uneasy with it. We'll get back to that. Now I'm just talking about what's in the conscious mind. What I know about myself, about my life, or at least what I allow myself to know about myself and about my life. And so it's not just my experiences and the people that I know, but what are the little wars that we fight in our head on a daily basis with ourselves? There's a question of how I wish to think, how I wish to be, what I wish to do, and whether I am meeting that or not. All of us, unless we completely surrender to whatever it is that goes on in my head at any given moment, struggle. Because we all have this situation where we're dealing with a brain that is not really equipped to be a refined, whole person of integrity. It's equipped to be able to survive. And survival doesn't really help me spend time and work on my own refinement. And so, on a certain level, if we're not looking at ourselves, because it's so much easier to look at other people, isn't it? It's so much easier, it's like, it's open book. Everybody else is an open book. We're perfect. Everybody else is a mess. So let's look at everybody else for a minute. It's like watching National Geographic. Just with clothes on and, hairstyles and things like that. Why? Because for all intents and purposes, we're just struggling to get through with the drives and instincts that we're equipped with. We're trying to get through our day. And we do it the way that we're programmed to do it. We don't think that it's programming because we think that we're thinking. But most of the time we're not thinking, we're just running, right? Our minds are just going on. And so we just go on. And so things kick in that we're not prepared to deal with or that we weren't necessarily anticipating. But here's the funny thing. The funny thing is that we're also programmed to think about the fact that we think about things and do things as though we wanted to do them. And so even if we find ourselves doing things that we're somewhat uncomfortable doing or that I didn't feel necessarily I should have done, I will convince myself very promptly that it was of course okay for me to do so and find any number of reasons to rationalize why it is that I've done so. Yeah? You're with me? So that's National Geographic. That's just the regular running machine. It's how all of us deal with things. And that's because we're programmed to run through protection and security and safety and so on and so forth. But what if I want to build a self? What if I want to choose not only what I do, but how I think, how I behave, the way in which I want to lead my life? So we will find that we have disparate components. There are pieces of my mind, behavior, self, that are not integrated. That in certain settings will work in certain ways, in other settings will work in other ways. When I get up on the right side of the bed, I'm a jolly person. When I don't get up on the right side of the bed, stay away from me. If I haven't had my coffee yet. All of these things, which are absurd. Because we can blame those things on any number of reasons why it is that I'm not being the person that I should be, or not acting in the way that I should act, or saying the things that I know I shouldn't say, but nonetheless did, and I was angry, and so on and so forth. But the question at the end of the day is, there is a mind that is aware of all of these things when they are going on. The only question is that in control, or is it just kind of taking a back seat with some popcorn and watching what's going on with the other element of mind? So that's a question that ultimately we have to deal with in our lives on some level and say, am I prepared to invest my life in creating a self that is consistent and integrated? And there's something to be said for integrity. Because that's what an integrated self is. It's an individual of integrity. And we seem to respect people of integrity. We seem to recognize that an individual that genuinely achieves almost any level of integrity is worth our respect. We value, for some reason, consistency. Because we recognize it, for the most part, as the rarest of things. Everybody else gets pretty much a free pass. We kind of, okay, you didn't have his coffee yet. Okay. This tea. Black tea, I'm an American. So, how do we do that? Well, first of all, it has a lot to do with memory. Because to remember really means to put things together. So this is the way that I've always spoken about it. Look inside. See the elements of self that are disparate. What is it that I want to be able to bring in line with each other and work on that? So that's a lifetime. In all honesty, it's a lifetime of work. And it is daily work. And it means that genuinely, when I go to sleep at night, I have to review my day. Have to. It cannot be done ad hoc. It can't be done haphazardly. If it is going to be from a mind that is the meta mind, the mind that is watching me, then I have to go back to that space and examine me. And so the question for us, the first question, this is only level 1, right? We haven't gotten to the other levels yet, which we're going to. Level 1, if I want to achieve an identity of integrity, ultimately, an identity of memory, in where there is a consistent, integrous, running self for the majority of my time on this earth, it requires meta thought. It requires for me to examine me and consider what it is and how it is that I'm dealing with these things and how they're manifesting. So to whatever level that we do that, more power, right? Wonderful. It's lovely. And so it's for that reason that Harambam writes in Hilchot Teshubah, and he's the only one, writes this halachically. If you have the pages, he says in number 4, he says, look, Al tomar shen teshuvah ele ma'avirot sheyesh bahen ma'aseh. Don't say, like when he says, don't say this. What don't say? Just don't think. Don't consider. No, don't say it, because the minute you say it, it already becomes a truth. So he says, don't even say it. Right? You shouldn't say this to people, that teshuvah is returning from evil deeds. It's not just about deeds, says the Rambam. Yes, deeds are externals, but the question is, where do they come from? Where do they originate? From where do they originate? Al tomar shen teshuvah ela me'avirot sheyesh bein ma'aseh. Don't say that teshuvah is only from transgressions that come from deed. Like znut, gezel, licentiousness, theft, these kinds of things. Don't say that. Ela, rather, kashem shetzarich adam lashuv me'elu, just as a person needs to return from those things. Kach hu tzarich lechapes bede'ot ra'ot sheyesh lo. He also has to search in the elements of attribute and the means of interaction that he or she has. Search for them. Find the things that are inconsistent, that aren't what ultimately you want to be in your finest vision of yourself. Kaas, anger, eva, being mean, kina'ah, jealousy, hitul, frivolity, mirdifat mamon, running after money, honor, kavod, ma'achalot, the best burger, kayotze bahen, these kinds of things. Why? Because the more that we feed into those things, the more we feed into the primal elements that keep us from integrity. We feed into the primal elements of survival. If I'm looking for the best burger, or for the money, or for my honor, or living in jealousy, I am drawing and feeding into my deepest drives that were meant to help me in local situations in the wild when I was a hunter and gatherer. They don't bode well in civilized society. Certainly not when I want to be a person that is whole and refined. So we're masters at taking those things and sublimating them. What do I mean by that? So pull the human being out of the field with the buffalo and the spear. Pull him out and put him in synagogue. As if everything changes the minute that he's wearing a suit and he's sitting in synagogue. Or she in synagogue. Or wherever it may be. So you don't have a spear in your hand anymore. And you're not chasing the bison. But nothing internally has changed. And so my drives find different ways of manifesting. So if I have to protect myself, if I feel threatened, if I feel that my place, territory, is being usurped, I am programmed to flee or fight or attack or protect, and I do it without thinking. My brain is programmed to do that. But that's not me. It's just my brain at work. We become human when we, in such situations, stop and say, what do I genuinely wish to do in this circumstance? What is required of me in this circumstance? Which is a different question than what do I want to do, right? If we ask ourselves, what am I required to do in this circumstance? What's required of me? It's a very different question than what do I want to do? And once I have a sense, I'm committed to having a self that is consistent and connected, I make very different decisions. Once that's my commitment. So far, so good? Following? So what does this have to do with Rosh Hashana? Everything. Everything. Because on a certain level, and this is a key to tonight, and so I want everybody please to at least hear this line. If you walk out with nothing else, walk out with this and mull it over. Our goal on Rosh Hashana is to get as close as we humanly can to seeing ourselves from the perspective of God. So don't tell me, well, God, God's God. I know that. I understand. I'm saying to get as close as we humanly can to seeing ourselves from the perspective of God. Not only how we wish that He would see us, but how does He see us? If I were to say how it is that I would imagine, what would it be? So in order for me to do that, I have to step outside of myself, and I have to look at myself as a whole entity. Don't sell God short by riddling yourself with guilt. That's not God. That would mean that God only sees certain things. and loves to hone in on all the yucky stuff. But that's not God. Sure, he sees it. But the beautiful thing, he sees it always within fullest context. Not only does he see it within context of yourself, he sees it within context of all that you've come from and all that you're connected to and everything that is connected to it. So the more that you can do that, the better. Not just because you are in judgment before him. I'm not going to talk about that a great deal tonight. I've done that in other talks on Rosh Hashana. But the one thing that I will say is that it is not foreboding judgment. It is judgment in the sense of assessment. How are we doing thus far in our project of becoming you? How's it going? I mean, you got to have assessments at certain points. There's got to be moments in where you say, okay, look, how is the project going? I did ask you to be you way back when. I said, Yehi, be. And I brought you in and, gave you what I gave you and so on and so forth. And I'm coming around. And so we're going to have a date in the diary in order to be able to see how the project is going. And if we're going to really look at how the project is going, we really need to assess the whole thing. I mean, who would we be helping if we were pretending not to look at most of the stuff that we need to look at, So if you're game, I'm game. Basically is what HaKadosh Baruch Hu is saying. So blow the shofar, sound the horn, get everybody around, wake up, open your minds, remember. Start remembering things. Start putting things together. Assess the different elements of your life before Rosh Hashana, so that when you come to Rosh Hashana and the shofar sounds and you're standing there, that you have a sense of self to speak of. With all of it. We're not going to conceal things over here. And that's a key thing on Rosh Hashanah. So it starts within. How am I doing internally? Am I happy with how it's running so far? Or do I find that I compartmentalize my life? Compartmentalization is the big enemy of Rosh Hashanah. Let's meditate on that for a minute. Compartmentalization. It's the way that we survive in this world, We compartmentalize. We segregate elements of our thought and consciousness so that we can cope. It's an instinct. And so if I have difficulties in one area of my life, but I have to get up and, take the kids to school in the morning, or I have to get up and work in the morning, or I have to get up and go to school in the morning, or whatever it is that I've got to do with my day, one of the coping mechanisms that we have is the capacity to compartmentalize, to put into compartments the various aspects of my life and access them at will, and put other things on the back burner. It's a coping mechanism. We all do it. Every single one of us. We all do it. And, okay. Sometimes it's okay, sometimes not okay. Sometimes there's levels of compartmentalization that are never okay because they cause you to become schizophrenic. And the question is, a major question with regards to that is, how firm are my barriers of compartments? Do I visit them? Ever? Or are they relegated to some closed-off, locked room in the dungeons of my mind and heart? Barely getting any food. There are elements of myself that I will tend to do that to. That's pretty heavy. I'm not going to go into that too much. I'll just leave that right there. But there are. Usually, it's a very young version of us that's relegated to the dungeon. Because we don't feel that it is worthy of being able to come out and see the light at any time. And we will do things to ourselves, the elements of self, the younger parts of ourselves, the vulnerable parts of ourselves, the sensitive parts of ourselves, even the angry parts of ourselves, the hurt parts of ourselves. We will do things to ourselves that we would not do to another human being. we treat ourselves with certain levels of cruelty that if we were caring for a child, not us, the child, another child, never in a million years would we ever do such things to that child. And yet we don't accuse ourselves of child abuse. So there are levels of self that we compartmentalize and segregate. There are levels of thought and experience that we compartmentalize and segregate. There are relationships that we compartmentalize and segregate. There are thoughts, feelings, experiences that we compartmentalize and segregate. And that is fine as a coping mechanism. It is problematic when the walls of segregation become so firm and so thick and so delineated that they no longer have capacity to reintegrate into our own lives. And to the degree that we do this, we lose identity. And we end up working on very minimalist levels of self. And it's not enough to be able to live a full life with. So those are the thoughts that we need to begin with. What do we do? I'm going to try tonight to give only one with each level of an action that can be an opening to this work. Now, it's important to understand, we've got Rosh Hashana every year for a reason. You're not going to do this in 1 year. None of us do. But if we are brave enough to genuinely experience Rosh Hashana, then it's worth trying. So if we're going to work on integrating ourselves, right, we can look at the attributes. You know, like the Rambam is saying, we can look at our anger and we can look at our stinginess and we can look at our greed and we can look at our bodily desires and our whatever it is that we've got. But more important is to look at why. Where are those things coming from? Well, we're humans. That's granted. But every one of us has our unique proclivities, our vices, our issues, whatever you want to call them, that we struggle with. And so in order to genuinely deal with them and attempt at integrating them, it is best to try, as best we can, not to address symptoms, but to address cause. So how do I do that? There's one thing you can do. Of many. But one thing, only one that I'm suggesting, of many, that can begin the ball rolling. You may want to see a therapist after this, but nonetheless, right? Make a timeline of your life. Look at your life. What do you include? I mean, it's a hard one, right? So if I'm going to make a timeline of my life, what do I do? Well, you were born, Chazak u'Baruch, right? But you include significant moments, experiences of your life, positive and negative. Significant is the key here. So you want to plot significance. Why? Because you're not God. That's why. So you're doing God in shorthand. Whereas with God we say, Ki zocher kol hanishkachot ata. You remember everything. En nistar mifnei kisei kavodecha. There's nothing that's hidden from you. Everything's hidden from us. We remember nothing. I don't remember what I had for dinner last night. But the question is significance. What comes out when I think about my life? So I was born, right? Okay, very good. Siblings were born. I remember those things. I'm the oldest, so I remember. Pretty much, except for my brother that's just after me, he was always there. I don't know where he came from, but the other ones, I remember. Remember their birth. I remember the circumstances. I remember the gifts that I got. I remember those things. I remember my house. I remember the television shows that I watched. I remember my grandparents' 50th anniversary. Whatever. I remember my parents' divorce. I remember my brother being burned when he was 2 years old. I remember many things, significant things. I remember the experiences of these things. I remember being student body president. I remember whatever it is. It'll be cathartic. Try it. Watch your life before Rosh Hashana. Look at the life that you have lived to this point in its significance, positive and negative. What does it look like to you? And when you think about yourself now, what does it mean to you? What does it tell you about who you are today? What do you want to tell God about those things? That's Rosh Hashana. And if we're going to do it right, and we're genuinely going to access the blessing of that day, it's a blessing that day. Our people have lived this day for 3 millennia. We are not the people that we are for no reason. If we really are going to access the day, let's deal with memory. So the truth is that memory is painful. And yet, we don't look at Rosh Hashanah as a painful day. The Achamim say, how are we supposed to celebrate Rosh Hashanah? Make good food, the stuff that you like. Ichlu mamtakim. Eat good, sweet, tasty food. Drink mamtakim. Ichlu mashmanim, shtu mamtakim, it says. Eat good, fatty food. Forget about the cholesterol and things like that. Shtu mamtakim. Drink good, sweet drinks. Shilhu manot le'en nachon lo. Send mishloach manot. That's really when you're supposed to send shloach manot. It's Rosh Hashanah. Shilchu manot le'en nachon lo. Still custom in this community. People send packages on Rosh Hashanah. It's a very nice custom. Yeah? So these things are things in what we're doing. Why are we celebrating this way, eating and drinking and so on? It's because we don't look at a life with both the positives and negatives and say, ugh, what a disaster. We look at a life and say, well, it's worth celebrating because I'm here and because I have a life to live and because it means something and because I have a life to create, an identity to cultivate. And yes, I've had the difficulties and hardships and so on and so forth, but they are who I am. They're mine. They're no one else's. They are me. And that's worth celebrating. He celebrates and we celebrate. So that's level 1. I'm going to talk about level 2. Level 2, memory, which I really haven't spoken about before. Level 2 of integration is not just my internal self, but the aspects of my life out there. My relationships, my work, my hobbies, my engagements and involvements with the world, my family, my children. How do those integrate? That's something we don't always think about. We do tend to think often, more or less, about myself and my integrity and so on and so forth. But what about those other aspects of my life? Do they integrate? My day at work, what I experience there, the work that's on my desk, my computer screen, the people that I need to meet, and so on and so forth. When I come home, I'm not saying that you have to bring your work with you home. Probably not a good idea, always. But is it two completely different worlds? Does anyone know, outside of your work, what goes on in your work? The relationships that you have in your life that are significant, do they know each other? Does anyone know all of them besides you? Why is that important? Again, compartmentalization. Because if the only one who knows about my whole life is me, then all of that stuff lives in my head. And so I've got these friends and those friends and this work and this family and so on and so forth, and I deal with them as I deal with them, when I deal with them, how I deal with them, and the circumstances that I deal with them. But they're all in my head and all in their little rooms. Is there a vessel in which you put that in order to integrate it? You follow what I'm saying? No, you don't. Okay. So you do this. And go straight to the action over here. Just to be able to visualize it. I'm a very visual learner, so it helps me to visualize things. Okay, so this is me, yeah? Me. And what have I got? Well, I've got work. And I've got family. And it's very generic, right? You want it to be like the other one, right? Where I go through all my stuff. I've got friends. I've got what? Study. I've got films, hobbies, etc., etc., etc. Where do these integrate? Do they integrate? Or are they their own special realms that live in their own special domains that I visit now and then? Is there anyone besides me who knows about all of my things, who I can speak to about all of my experiences, connections, and relationships in life? Why is that an important question? Memory. Integrity. When we get used to relegating these things into their own little spaces, we essentially pull ourselves apart. And we become different people in each place, with each thing. Which is not necessarily a problem, mind you, to be a different. You can express different aspects of self. But do they integrate? Is there any place that they integrate? And so often you need a vessel within which they can integrate. That vessel can be a person. Could be your best friend. Could be your spouse. Could be your brother, your sister. But is there someone with whom you can present your entire life? And it makes all the difference in the world. Because if you don't or can't, then there's blockage. And it means that there are partitions to the whole that I ultimately can become. So these things are working in my life, but they're separate. And if they're separate, how do I weave them together into a whole and complete person so that in my mind they're not in compartments, and in these people they're not in compartments, and somehow, on some level, I have a place that I can go mentally, experientially, personally, where they all live. And so, a lot of us think about heaven this way, you'll go to heaven and they'll all be there. Just one big party of everybody that you know, and everybody will get along and so on and so forth, yeah. Maybe. I don't know. But it can happen here. And on whatever level it can, it is important that it does. And that is also part of Rosh Hashana. Because when we stand before God, remember, our goal is to try and present ourselves and see ourselves as He sees us. You think He doesn't know about these things? Think He doesn't know about that little guy, secret friend that you've got, that you're talking to and so on? He knows. He and you. But it's very quiet and it all lives up here. And so this is the second level. The first level is internal. The second level is external. But all of that is a question of zikaron. It's all a question of integrity and living a self that is full of memory, that is memorable. I'm going to end the last 10-15 minutes of class with this. I know I had all of these. I want you to take a look, please, at Rav Kook. That's number 5. Number 5 on the page. The first sources I put on are for you if you want to see them. They're all about the memory of Rosh Hashana. That Rosh Hashana is about memory and that the whole day is supposed to be a work of memory. Rav Kook writes one of the most beautiful things. He always writes so beautifully, but he writes one of the most beautiful things about Teshuvah. Rav Kook was the first chief rabbi of Israel before it was a state, so then Palestine. Ashkenazi chief rabbi, Rav Yitzchak Kohen Abraham Kook. And he says as follows, "K'sheshochechim et haneshama ha'atzmit." So he opens talking about forgetting rather than remembering. He says, when we forget the essential soul that we are made of, כשמסיחים דעה מלהסתכל בתוכיות החיים הפנימיים, when we allow for our minds to wander away from focusing on our internal life force, who we are, what we are, hakol na'asa me'urvav u'msupak, everything becomes confusing. It's just one big salad. Mishkababel, as we would say. Hateshuvah harashit, the first need or the first move towards return, towards teshuvah, is Me'irat HaMachshachim, Teshuvah Rashit, Shehi Me'irat HaMachshachim Miyad, which enlightens and brings light to all of the dark places, She'ashuv Ha'adam El Atzmo, that a person return to oneself. Ha'adam Yashuv El Atzmo, El Shoresh Nishmato, to the roots of his soul. Umiyad Yashuv El Hashem. And once you do that, you immediately return to God. So this is a brilliant point, because everybody talks about returning to God, but nobody asks who's returning. That's an assumption, right? We make it say, well, I am. Well, who's you? Oh, that's a different story. That's a whole other question, right? I'm a mess, but I'm returning. Well, that's good. Let's get ourselves out of the mess first, or as much as we can out of it, and then we'll return. But if we're going to return, at least let us return as an integrated person to whatever capacity we can integrate. That is why, one of the major reasons why, Rosh Hashanah comes before Yom Kippur. Yom Kippur is a day of addressal. In other words, I'm standing before God to address the problems. I'm standing before God to say, listen, this was out, my family was out of the picture. I don't talk to my kids. I have no relationship with my brothers and sisters. My parents are a miserable, difficult problem, whatever the case may be, right? Good. Are you going to fix that? I mean, are we going to address that or what? Or do you want that to just live in some, outhouse, outboat somewhere, of your life tethered to the rest of you? Are you cutting it loose? How's that going to go? Or my work. Yeah, I just can't seem to focus on being productive and what I need to do and so, but I'm really a great dad, Really great. Okay, well, Hazaku Baruch, but this is the world and we need money, Got to invest here. And how's that going to go? Those are Rosh Hashanah problems. They're Rosh Hashanah issues. They're shofar things that call your attention to, well, what's tethered on the island over there that you rarely ever visit. And are we going to look at it? And is it going to come into integration with the rest of the person that's standing before me? Once I realize that I have things that I want, it's okay. So I take 10 days to try and get my affairs in order, and I stand before God on Yom Kippur and say, look, okay, so this is what I want to say. Yeah, I haven't seen my family for a very long time. I don't speak to my kids. They can't stand to sit at the table with me, and yeah, that's it. I don't know what I'm going to do about it on Yom Kippur, by the way. I have absolutely no idea, but I'm certainly not going to stand in front of God on Yom Kippur and say, no, my family, it's fine. I love my kids. They're fine. That's not happening. That we don't do. And in order to be able to do that realistically, we need a Rosh Hashanah, and where we're going to look at how things run and are integrated, not just internally, but externally. So make a timeline of our lives, and look at what it is that we are against that timeline. See ourselves against its backdrop. Make a spider graph. Seriously, I'm not kidding. This is work. It's good work. Do it. Make a spider graph of your life. What are the components? And are they integrated? And to what capacity do they talk to each other, connect to each other? In which arena? In what space? With which person? Can you share it all? Can you be everything that you are? And at the very least, can you stand before God and admit it all? I mean, if it's no one else, yes, which it shouldn't be. Because there's something, and this is what I'm saying I want to end with, but there's something about bringing these things out of my mind and into the world. And unless you genuinely know God to be that external entity that you genuinely talk to as another entity, it's helpful to talk to another person or to bring it out somewhere outside of your mind so that it can be presented as an entirety, as a whole. You could look at it and see it and live it and experience it that way. I guarantee you will be happier. It may be terribly painful to do, but you will be happier. You'll be able to be whole and achieve what the Hachamim say is being sameach bechilko, happy in your chelik, in what you've got in your life. So how? So the final thing is the speech. One of the greatest and most effective mechanisms of integration is speech. To speak things out. Say them. When you say them, first of all, they become real. The more you are able to articulate the different aspects of your life, the more your mind becomes consciously aware of them. So speech lifts these elements out of the unconscious into the living conscious. That's why Freud, he used to do this free association stuff, yeah? To try and pull things out of the unconscious. So he would say something and say, well, the first thing comes into your mind, you know? And you'd say something and he'd say something and he'd say something. And he wrote that he saw people started to resist this exercise because they saw that he was pulling things out of their unconscious that they really weren't interested in getting out. They were shocked themselves at the associations they had. At the way they had already integrated things. And what manner things were integrated. Jung writes so importantly, so beautifully about individuation. About the fact that we start off with very disparate elements of our psyche, of ourself. And our maturity and growth is essentially the function and act of bringing those things not only out of the subconscious and into the conscious, but in an integrated consciousness. Do you know what integrated consciousness is? Rosh Hashana. That's the shofar. It's bringing it up, waking it up, pulling it together. Stand before me and say memories, says HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And that's what we do every Rosh Hashanah. It is a day of integrated conscious memory, where the identity, the self, shines. And so of course you're not going home to rip your clothes after that experience. You're going home to have the most amazing lunch, sit with your family, enjoy the fact that you're alive, and celebrate your being. That's Rosh Hashanah. And that's what it's meant to be. And we wish people only more years and more years and more years. Why? More time to work stuff out. It's great. Many years. Right? And so it's all about the dialogue. And therefore, the haftarah of Shabbat Shuvah, or what we call as Sfaradim Shabbat Teshuvah, right? The Shabbat of Teshuvah, which is the Shabbat between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, there's one key thing that the Navi says in it. You want to return? You want to come back? Find yourself? Be all you are? Bring words with you. It says beautifully in Hosea number 7. Kru imachem devarim. Bring with you words. Veshuvu el Adonai, and return to God. Don't come without words. If we're just going to stand there in some silent mindset, no integration can happen. And this is why, essentially what God is saying to you is, come talk to me. Speak it out. I'll be your therapist. Listen. I'm listening. Talk to me. Why? Well, one reason is because when you talk, it actually does create neural connections. It really does drop neural connections from the prefrontal cortex down into the amygdala so that your primal instincts actually have a way to be able to develop and work in ways that are functional and productive. You become aware of the elements of experience in your life that you're holding inside into a conscious sense of how it is that I can actually deal with this. It's why therapy works if you find a good therapist, which is rare, but when you do, it works. And it's great. But to whatever degree, it is important that we speak. This is why the crux of Yom Kippur is speech. It's vidui. Every single prayer of Yom Kippur includes vidui. It is the whole of the day. As a matter of fact, the vidui, what is vidui? Vidui is the articulation of my transgression, or the articulation of where I've missed the mark. Speaking it out before God. It's so important. We do this before Yom Kippur starts. God forbid we miss it, right? I mean, it's the craziest thing. The craziest thing almost in all of rabbinic literature. I don't mean that literally that it's a crazy thing. I'm saying it's very outlandish, very strange, right, in rabbinic literature. I'm watching you. Okay. So, we're not going to say. Before Yom Kippur, before the day starts, at Mincha, you already start talking and articulating. Why? I might choke at dinner, that's why. No, literally, that's the reason. Shemei Yahanek. I might choke at dinner. How come on Sukkot I don't say, listen, at Mincha time you might as well take the lulav and etrog because you might choke at dinner and not get there tomorrow morning. That's not a problem. Only this is a problem. Yes, because okay, listen, that's a mitzvah and it's important and I've got to do it. This is a question of the whole of my life, you see. I'm addressing everything that I am to God. I can't afford to choke on my dinner and not get this done. Ketz mechilah u'slicha liYisrael. It is the ultimate, the end, in terms of my capacity to address myself, deal with my standing before God. Before existence itself. And so yes, and then once Kippur starts, Arvit, Shachrit, Musaf, Mincha, Ne'ilah, every single one of them, Al chet shechatanu lefanecha. Why? I'm not going to pretend today that these things don't exist. No compartmentalizations on Rosh Hashana and Yom Kippur. No closing of doors, of relegating things to the outskirts of my life and mind on Rosh Hashana and Yom Kippur. It all comes out on Rosh Hashana and Yom Kippur. Similar to the Jews. We all come out on Yom Kippur. Oh no, everything that's compartmental, we all come around on Yom Kippur, right? And so it's very symbolic. It's very nice. But that's supposed to happen in my head too. Your whole head's supposed to come to synagogue. Your whole heart, all of the elements of your life are supposed to come to synagogue. You bring it all with you. And you know what used to happen to me when I was younger? I would come to synagogue on Yom Kippur and Rosh Hashanah and think about like one problem I had. No, not intentionally. It's just what happened. Like I fixated on, it's one problem in my life. Okay, so that's what happens when you're young. But when you start to realize that there is a life that you're building, that there is elements of yourself that you're working on integrating, you want to try and bring your entire self. And this prep work is useful. And really, it's not some new age stuff that I'm telling you to do. The Hachamim are saying it in their ways. That's what the Rambam means when he says, Mehakol tzarich lashub. You have to really look at it and say, okay, look, what are my issues? Do I really have a problem before I have my coffee in the morning? Am I really not nice at the office? Do I snap at people? Could I say things nicer? And those are the easy things. What about the externals? I mean, those are not easy. Don't get me wrong. The easiest things are the deeds. Those are the easiest things, which we can't even manage. But those are the easiest things to end. You make your decision, you stop it, and finish. The only reason we have problem with willpower is because we don't make decisions. Willpower is useless. It's useless. Sometimes you win, sometimes you don't, sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. It's a repository. You use it up, you use it up. There's nothing. Willpower is not the way to do things. You either make your decision or you haven't made your decision. If you're living in doubt, then all you got is willpower. But if you make a decision, you made a decision. And once you make a decision to live your life in a certain way, and I mean make a decision, I don't mean kind of wish to kind of hope to live your life in a certain way, but maybe on one special day I might go back to the other way, and so I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about you make a decision. This is the way that I'm living my life. It's not about willpower anymore. You force yourself into problems. It's like my writing. I don't want to write every week. But I've got a deadline, and people are going to talk. And I know what it's like when people talk. I'm telling you. It's not good. It's not good. And so you're stuck. You make a decision. You put yourself into a place in where this is your new reality. You don't compartmentalize it. You move to that place. You live in that space once you make that decision. And once you do, you have the natural components that put you into that place of being in that decision. Speaking is an essential part of it. Saying it out is an essential part of it. And so HaKadosh Baruch Hu says to us through Hosea, K'hui machem devarim, take words. Kippur, speak it out to me. Arvit, Shahrit, Musaf, Mincha, Ne'ilah, speak it out to me over and over and over. That's the whole day. And it changes us if we pay attention and know what it is that we're doing. And so essentially Rosh Hashana and Yom Kippur are these days of self-building, of self-awareness, of full consciousness, of robust identity. And all of the components are there. The most primal, remedial components are there. You have an alarm to call your attention, and you have a memory that's supposed to be intact, and you stand before God and do all you can to be everything that you are. These things, they help. Write a journal. Keep a journal. 3 lines a day. It's not a big deal. You don't have to write a Megillah every single day of whatever. Something. But it helps to be able to see our lives from the outside and to genuinely build a self that is in control, that is existing, that you know that you can bank on, that you know that you can say, I will be there, I will do it, I in the future will ultimately. Why is that important? That's who I am. And for us to be able to say, this is who I am, and to mean it, and to know that I can back it up, there's no greater blessing, there's no greater strength, ultimately, of our lives. And that's everything that God asks of us. I mean it. That's not trite. I mean it. It's all that God asks of us. He asks us to be, but in our fullest capacity. And so these beautiful days, really these beautiful days, are fantastic opportunities for us to be able to do that. And every single thing that we do on those days facilitates it, if you pay close attention. I wish you tizku shanim rabot, neimot v'tovot. Thank you very much for coming out and spending the time tonight. And please, God will have many more opportunities. May it be a year filled of health and blessing and happiness. May God bless you and us and our communities all for success and strength and all good things. Amen. Amen.